everyone, my name is Triput Marina with my student ID number 332500035. I'm from Dinasarna Informatika, Faculty of Communication and Language. I'm majoring in English Literature. First of all, thank you for giving the opportunity to present my English grammar project. Today, I will present two grammar topics, degree of comparison and relative clauses. After that, I will also present the error analysis related to these topics and correlative conjunctions. The purpose of this presentation is to help us understand the grammar rules, recognize common mistakes, and learn how to use these structures correctly in daily communication and academic writing. So, without any further ado, let's begin with the first topic, degree of comparison. Our first topic is degree of comparison. I'm sure all of us have compared people or things before. For example, we might say someone is taller than another person, or one place is more beautiful than another. In English, we cannot compare things randomly. We have to follow specific grammar rules. Those rules are called degree of comparison. Now, let's understand what degree of comparison actually means. Degree of comparison is a grammar rule used to compare the quality, quantity, or characteristics of two or more people, animals, objects, or places. In other words, whenever we want to compare something in English, we use degree of comparison. There are three types. The first is positive degree, which shows equality between two things. And the second is comparative degree, which compares two people or things. And the third is superlative degree, which compares three or more people or things and shows the highest or lowest level. Understanding these three types is important because each one has a different pattern and function. Now let's discuss the function of degree of comparison. The first function is to show equality between two people or things. Usually we use the pattern as and as. For example, Lisa is as kind as her sister. This means Lisa and her sister have the same level of kindness. And the second function is to compare differences between two people or things. For example, my car is faster than yours. This sentence tells us that my car has a higher speed than your car. The third function is to express the highest or the lowest equality among the three or more people or things. For example, Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world. So, degree of comparison helps us make comparisons more clearly and accurately. Now, let's learn the three types one by one. The first type is positive degree. It is used to show that two people or things are equal. The pattern is subject plus verb plus s plus adjective plus s plus object. For example, Lisa is as kind as her sister. Next is comparative degree. This type compares only two people or two things. The pattern is subject plus verb plus adjective or more plus adjective plus than plus object. For example, my car is faster than yours. Finally, we have superlative degree. This type is used when comparing three or more people or things. The pattern is subject plus verb plus the plus adjective as or the most plus adjective. For example, Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world. By understanding these patterns, we can choose the correct form when making comparisons. Now, let's look at the grammar rules. For one syllable adjectives, we usually add er to form the comparative and s to form the superlative. For example, tall becomes taller and tallest. Another example is small becomes smaller and smallest. For adjectives with two or more syllables, we generally use more on and most. For example, beautiful becomes more beautiful and most beautiful. Likewise, expensive becomes more expensive and most expensive. Finally, there are irregular adjectives, which do not follow the normal rules. For example, good becomes better and best. Bad becomes worse and worse. And far becomes further or further. And the superlative form is farthest and furthest. These irregular forms must be memorized because they do not follow the usual pattern. Now let's look at some original examples and analyze them. The first sentence is my brother is as patient as my father. This is a positive degree because it used the parent as to show that both people have the same level of patience. The second sentence is this smartphone is faster than my old phone. This is comparative degree because it compares to smartphones. Since fast is a one-syllable adjective, we simply add "er". The third sentence is learning English is more enjoyable than learning history. Here we use more enjoyable because enjoyable is a long adjective with more than one syllable. The last sentence is Jakarta is the busiest city in Indonesia. The sentence uses the superlative degree because it compares Jakarta with all other cities in Indonesia and shows the highest level. These examples demonstrate how different types of degree of comparison are used in different situations. Now, let's look at examples taken from a news article. Using authentic examples from mass media help us understand that grammar is not only used in textbooks, but also in real-life communication. The first sentence says the world is now warmer than at any time in the last 125,000 years. In this sentence, the phrase warmer than is a comparative form. It compares today's global temperature with temperatures recorded during the last 125,000 years. The second sentence says sea levels are rising faster than in previous centuries. Here, faster than compares the current speed of sea level rise with the speed in previous centuries. Both examples show how comparative adjectives are commonly used in news articles to compare facts and describe change over time. To conclude this topic, the degree of comparison is one of the fundamental grammar rules in English. It allows us to compare people, places, animals, and objects accurately. By understanding the three types, positive, comparative, and superlative, we can express equality, differences, and the highest or lowest level correctly. In addition, knowing the grammar rules helps us avoid common mistakes when speaking or writing in English. So, mastering the degree of comparison can improve both our grammar accuracy and our communication skills. Now that we have finished discussing the degree of comparison, let's move on to our second topic, which is relative clauses. Now let's move on to the second topic, which is relative clauses. Besides comparing things, another important grammar topic is relative clauses. This topic is very common in English because it helps us combine ideas into one sentence instead of writing many short sentences. If we use relative clauses correctly, our writing and speaking will sound more natural, more formal, and more fluent. Let's begin by understanding the definition of relative clauses. A relative clause is a dependent clause that gives additional information about the noun or pronoun. Because it is a dependent clause, it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. The main purpose of a relative clause is to avoid repetition and make our sentences more concise. There are several functions of relative clauses. First, they help us identify or describe a person, place, animal, or thing. Second, they provide extra information without creating another sentence. Third, they combine to relate ideas into one sentence, making our writing more connected and easier to read. For example, the student who won the competition is my friend. Instead of saying the student won the competition, the student is my friend, we combine the two ideas into one sentence by using the relative pronoun who. This is why relative clauses are widely used in essays, news articles, and academic writing. There are two main types of relative clauses. The first is defining relative clause. A defining relative clause gives us essential information about a noun. Without this information, the sentence would be incomplete or unclear. This type doesn't use commas. For example, the student who won the competition is my classmate. Here, the class who won the competition tells us exactly which student we are talking about. The second type is non-defining relative clause. A non-defining relative clause gives additional information only. Even if we remove the clause, the main sentence is still complete. For example, Mr. John, who teaches English, is very friendly. In the sentence, who teaches English only gives extra information about Mr. John. Therefore, commas are required. So the main difference is that defining clauses are essential, while non-defining clauses only add extra information. Now let's discuss the relative pronouns that are commonly used. The first is who. We use who for people when it functions as the subject. For example, the girl who won the competition is my sister. Next is whom. We use whom for people when it functions as the object. For example, the teacher whom I met yesterday was very kind. Then we have whose. Whose shows possession. For example, the student whose project won the competition received a scholarship. The next pronoun is which refers to animals or things. For example, the book which I borrowed is very interesting. Another relative pronoun is that can replace who or which in many defining relative clauses. For example, the laptop that I bought yesterday works perfectly. Finally, we have where and when. Where refers to places. This is the school where I studied. When refers to time. I still remember the day when we first met. Choosing the correct relative pronoun is important because each one has a different function. Now let's look at some original examples and analyze them. The first sentence is the teacher who explained the lesson is very patient. The word who refers to the teacher, so it used for a person. The second sentence is the laptop that I bought last week works perfectly. Here that refers to the laptop, which is a thing. The third sentence is my hometown, which is located near the beach, attracts many tourists. This is a non-defining relative clause because the information between commas is additional information. The last example is the student whose project won the competition received a scholarship. In the sentence, whose shows possession because the project belongs to the student. This example shows that choosing the correct relative pronoun depends on the noun we are describing. Next, let's look at authentic examples from mass media. The first example is climate scientists who study the Earth's atmosphere agree that human activity is the main driver. The relative pronoun who introduces a defining relative clause because it identifies which climate scientists are being discussed. Without the clause who study the Earth's atmosphere, the meaning would be less specific. The second example is extreme weather events, which are becoming more frequent, have caused widespread damage. In this sentence, which introduces a non-defining relative clause, the information which are becoming more frequent only provides additional information about extreme weather events. The commas indicate that the clause is not essential to identify the noun. This example shows that relative clauses are frequently used in news articles to provide clear and detailed information. To conclude this topic, relative clauses are an essential part of English grammar because they help us describe nouns more clearly and connect ideas smoothly. By understanding the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses, as well as knowing how to use the correct relative pronouns, we can write sentences that are more accurate, more natural, and more effective. Mastering relative clauses is especially useful for academic writing, professional communication, and everyday conversation. Now that we have finished discussing part 1, let's continue to part 2, where I will analyze grammatical errors related to relative clauses, degree of comparison, and correlative conjunction. Now let's continue to part 2, which is error analysis. In this section, I analyzed three paragraphs containing grammatical errors related to relative clauses, degree of comparison, and correlative conjunction. For each paragraph, I identified 10 grammatical errors. Then I explained why each sentence was incorrect, mentioned the grammar rule that had been violated, and finally rewrote the paragraph using the correct grammar. This activity is very useful because it helps us recognize common mistakes that English learners often make. Let's begin with the first paragraph about relative clauses. This is the original paragraph provided by the lecturer. At first glance, the paragraph looks correct. However, after reading it carefully, we can find several mistakes involving relative pronouns, unnecessary pronouns, and incorrect sentence structures. The goal of this analysis is not only to correct the sentences but also understand why they are incorrect. Now let's examine the errors one by one. So let's start with the first errors. The first mistake is the student which won the competition. The word which is used for things or animals, not for people. Therefore, it should be replaced with who. The second mistake is who she booked. Here the sentence shows possession, so we must use whose instead of who. The correct sentence is whose book was published last year. The third mistake is using where together with it. Because where already refers to a place, the extra pronoun makes the sentence incorrect. A better sentence is the library which was renovated recently is very modern. The fourth mistake is whose he studies linguistics. The pronoun he is unnecessary because whose cannot be followed by another subject in this pattern. This mistake shows that choosing the correct relative pronoun is very important. The fifth sentence uses who to refer to a laptop. Since a laptop is an object, we should use that or which, not who. The sixth sentence contains an unnecessary subject. The phrase "that she teaches syntax" should become "who teaches syntax." The seventh mistake is "discuss about." The verb discuss doesn't need the preposition about. Therefore, the correct expression is simply discuss. The eighth sentence uses whom article, but it should be whose article because the sentence expresses possession. The nin sentence contains "but", "that", and "were" together. Only one relative word is needed, so the correct sentence is "this is the campus where I studied for 4 years." And the last mistake is using which together with it. The pronoun "it" should be removed because the relative pronoun already functions as the subject. Now, let's move on to the second paragraph, which focuses on the degree of comparison. Most of the mistakes in this paragraph involve incorrect comparative and superlative forms. Many learners make these mistakes because they combine two comparison patterns at the same time or use the wrong adjective form. Let's look at the examples. The first mistake is more large. Since lar is a one-syllable adjective, we simply add er, making it larger. The second mistake is the most smartest. This is called a double superlative because it uses both most and us together. The third mistake is more easier. Again, this is double comparative. The first sentence uses the quietest than. When comparing only two things, we should use quieter than, not the superlative form. The fifth mistake is interestinger. Because interesting is a long adjective, we should say more interesting, not interestinger. Let's continue with the remaining errors. The sixth sentence uses expensiver. The correct form is more expensive. The seventh sentence is says more best, which is another example of a double superlative. The eighth sentence uses the more comfortable, but it should be the most comfortable. The ninth sentence says most cheap than. The correct comparative form is cheaper than. Finally, the last sentence uses better. Since bad is an irregular adjective, its comparative form is worse. After correcting all 10 mistakes, the paragraph follows the correct rules of degree of comparison. Next, let's analyze the third paragraph. which discusses correlative conjunctions. Correlative conjunction always work in pairs. If we choose the wrong pair or use different grammatical forms after each conjunction, the sentence becomes are incorrect. Another important rule is parallel structure, which means both parts connected by the conjunction should have the same grammatical errors. The first sentence is uses both or. The correct is both and. The second sentence uses either and. It should be either or. The third sentence is neither or. The correct pair is neither nor. The fourth sentence says not only and also. The correct expression is not only but also. The fifth sentence has a problem with parallel structure. The sentence combines collecting with to analyze, which are different forms. To make the sentence parallel, we change it to collecting data and analyzing the results. Now let's discuss the last five errors. The sixth sentence uses whether and. The correct pair is whether or. The seventh sentence is says no sooner when. The correct expression is no sooner than. The eighth sentence says scarcely than. It should be scarcely when. The ninth sentence contains such, that so many. The word so is unnecessary and should be removed. The last sentence uses rather than also. The word also should be omitted because the correct pair is simply rather than. After making these corrections, the paragraph becomes grammatically accurate. From this error analysis, we can conclude that most grammar mistakes happen because of incorrect grammar patterns, misuse of relative pronouns, incorrect comparison forms, and wrong conjunction pairs. By understanding the grammar rules behind each mistake, we can avoid making similar errors in the future. This activity has also improved my ability to identify grammatical errors and apply the correct forms confidently. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this presentation has helped explain the concepts of degree of comparison, relative clauses, and correlative conjunctions, as well as the importance of identifying and correcting grammatical errors. If there are any questions or suggestions, I would be happy to hear them. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day and see you in next video. Bye bye.